You're listening to Dirty Feet, a podcast from No More Radio.
Vous écoutez le podcast Dirty Feet sur les ondes de No More Radio.
Hosted by,
animé par
Allison Burns,
JD Papillon
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
Stay tuned.
We're gonna move you. Hey, welcome everyone to our 102nd episode of Dirty Feet. Today we're welcoming artists who will be presenting at Tangente. So this week on October 30th, 31st, November 1st and November 2nd. It will be presented at the Studio de Québec du Monument National. So with us today is the artist Bettina Hoffmann, who is presenting the piece Isolation, and Marie St-Amand Williamson and Zohar Melinek, who will be presenting Nation Individual. So first of all, hi everyone, how are you doing today?
Very good.
Great. Yeah.
Good.
Hi.
So for former listeners of Movement Museum, they might remember that we did welcome Mary and Zohar back then for the piece Collective Individual. That was in 2013, and we're very happy to welcome it again. And this is our first time with Bettina Hoffmann. So the pieces that you are presenting, it's in a way, well, it's a first for each of them, first of all. Like, it's the first time that you're presenting those specific works in Montreal, right?
Somewhat. I presented a very simple version of Isolation a year ago at the Darling Foundry, but that was just one evening. It was their, a fundraiser evening they do every year, so that was there, in a different space, and now it's developed for a stage.
Okay.
I don't know if it was so simple.
It was not.
It was quite... Well, no, I just think the treatment was quite interesting because it was multi-level. Different parts of the Darling Foundry were used, including Bettina's studio, a stairwell, hallway, because it's quite a dynamic space, the foundry. Mm-hmm. So, not to...
No, simple. I meant more a first version.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's different. It changes when it's all in one space. That's true.
For sure.
Yeah.
For us, we did... the show that we're presenting in Tangente it's kind of a combination of two shows that we previously did in Montreal. But this is, again, similar to Bettina, our kind of revisioning those two shows, and it's the first time we're combining them. So we kind of gathered different parts of the shows that we liked, and we kind of puzzled them together. The soundtrack and the images are still very similar.
But some of it has changed. We've done both choreographies here in Montreal. Mostly Nation's Legacy of Severance was done in kind of non-traditional spaces, like a former gallery. We also performed it in Berlin at a artist squat, which is now like a cultural center, and then outside in Paris. So it's not only shifted in terms of adding new choreography from another dance or another score, but it's also shifting each time in terms of the space. So the space has played a really big role in determining the choreography. The opening of the piece has changed because of the platforms, those metal platforms at Monument National. You know, the... Mm-hmm.
The escalator.
I'm making an image with my fingers and no one can see that. The
this
walkway.
Is one of the sadnesses about podcasting. We don't see what the artists are doing. But for the walkway, you're saying basically that you're going to be bringing this into the performance. You'll be using the space as is.
Yeah,
rather
I think
than just a Marley space.
Yeah, our shows were always about really kind of taking into consideration where we're presenting them, and now it's the same.
Space.
So it changes a little.
And with a space like Monument National as part of Tangente, I guess you didn't really get any time in the space to create the piece?
No. Not yet. We will have some time.
This
Not
week.
Much.
We'll have like
2 days before the show, we have time.
Which is actually, that's great. That's better than no days. before the show.
Clearly. And since all three of you, and I might be reaching right now, but seem to be influenced by the space where you're presenting works, having done a lot of in situ or site-specific works, how does it feel to be presenting a work now in a space like that has a lot of character without getting to explore how you can use it as material for your pieces?
I was when I saw the space the first time, I was quite impressed. It's really like a black hole in a way. So I like that, and the stage is pretty much square. So I thought that was an interesting constraint for the piece. But I'm not using anything else from that space. I really want the black box, and I have very little elements which will stick out quite strongly, which is just a conference table, an office chair, and something like a huge door, we could say. And that's it. And that I could see, I imagine, quite interesting. So very simple geometric square, in that kind of simple square space.
In your case, Bettina, as part of the project, you mentioned in the press release, this office space. But the Tangente space, the Monument National space at Studio de Québec, there's something a bit grungy about it. There's something that it feels very it feels like an old factory to some extent, with the uncovered walls, like the brick walls and everything.
But they will be hopefully covered, so they won't be so dominant. And then, there's this whole metal structure, the mezzanine, and those things. But this is it won't be. Also, we have a curtain in the back, so that would be. I hope we have that impression. It's quite neutral in a way.
So you want to sanitize the space to some extent?
Sanitize? No, I want the space just be the physical space, but not bring in too much atmosphere, I think.
Okay.
And sanitize. Maybe I want to use it as a very clean space, clean, empty, and just with those few objects, and certainly the 4 dancers in it.
And with something like an office space, which itself has a strong connotation, an office space nowadays represents a sort of way of life in society nowadays, which is again very pared down, which is all about efficiency, which is all about production. Do you feel that by stripping away the meaning of the walls of the space, is this streamlining the production for you? Like, is there is there a message about removing everything that is not useful in the space as part of the artistic vision?
For me, the office space is not defined by the walls. It's more like I define it by an office chair and a conference table. Conference table also, people gather. But there's also something about conference table that means someone has a better spot to sit. There's hierarchy. It's quite large, but on the other hand, it's also they're coming together. But it's not a community. They do teamwork, but it's not really. They don't. It's teamwork. But no community. So there's also a lot of competition in office space. You have to behave well, correct. Don't be too individual or. And this I find really interesting. And so I reduce the office space to those things like conference table and only one office chair, which rolls, which is also interesting because it's a wheelchair, And this I like also the notion of the office chair being a wheelchair. So
the costumes also indicate are signifiers of the environment as well, because the clothing that is worn is. I worked in an office, so I can identify with it's kind of like a prison, they tell you what to wear, when you can have your lunch, when you can go home, what you can do, what you have to do while you're there. And there are very specific, unless you make a lot of money working in that office, the clothing that you choose is...
And the cubicles. Also, again, very jail cell representationally.
Yeah, it's like uniform clothing. So they lose their individuality, those people. So, but they also get crazy in the play, so which is nice. But they never. Well, I don't want to say too much.
Right.
They never get free, I think. But they are trying things, but they remain confined in that environment. Yeah.
And for Mary and Zohar, of course, I haven't seen this new version of the piece, but with Collective Individual that you'd presented before, there was a different type of entrapment there, which was more about war, about conflict. Is this something that remains prominent in this new version of the piece?
Yeah, for sure. Definitely more so because we're combining elements from Nation's Legacy of Severance, which had a lot to do with isolation. Actually, the film version we have of that show was shot in this old factory building,
Atelier Jean Briot,
and it really gave kind of a sense of extreme isolation after kind of you follow the path of those two individuals in the space by themselves, kind of going in between states of sanity, insanity, psychological issues that they're dealing with. You really sense the isolation element as a part of kind of that space. It looks kind of like a cave too. So definitely with collective individual and Nation's Legacy of Severance, there's a lot to do with it as well. Isolation.
Yeah, I would say more like it's they play back and forth. I mean, the piece that you saw, I think, is more obviously the two figures are quite isolated from each other in the beginning, and then they come together. So, is the question about isolation?
Well, the question is mostly about because we talked about the confinement of the office space.
Okay.
And in your case, there's a different kind of confinement, which would be caused by the war, caused by conflict. And again, I guess the idea of hierarchy also is present to some extent in your work.
I think that there's, as I talk about it now, and as I think about it, and even in relation to the question you asked about the space, it's going to change when we bring it into the space. We're just imagining it. But also the idea of the way I've been kind of spinning it in my head is that it's a workspace, it's a job site. So we're working, whether we're in prisoners of war or having to work for a war effort. There's certainly a war element to it, which is something that is actually quite relevant, I think, at any time, even in the last 13 years in Canada, and also from the different places that we're all from. But that space at Monument National is... the audience is on. There's a big slant. They're raked. So they're looking down at us, and we're working. So we are working for them, and they are kind of watching a workspace. So in some ways, the confinement is inherent in the space, but it has quite high ceilings. It's just that there are these brick walls, and then there's all this metal above us. So I think. It's confining in some senses, but I'm not sure if that's what will happen because we haven't actually performed it in this space. It'll be interesting. I'm sure. I think it's going to change. The work is going to change.
Actually, I feel the space is warmer than everything.
Than
yeah, and everything everywhere else that we performed it before, and also the way the video interacts with the space. We're gonna project it on a curtain, and we're gonna be sometimes performing behind the curtain while there's video, so there's kind of the images are meshed with our body movement, and that kind of also gives it a warmer aesthetics in general to the whole performance that we haven't done before. That's kind of the sense that I get.
Back when you did it at the May, what were you projecting on again? I don't remember. Was it against the wall? Or was
just
it
a screen?
A screen.
Regular screen.
Okay, but now it will be against a curtain. How does that impact the images on the video, you feel?
It's see-through.
Okay.
So the curtain is black, and you see all the elements, the kind of the industrial elements of the space behind it. So you see the escalator, and you would see us when we're there behind the curtain.
With those projects, you've been, for all three of you actually, Montreal audiences might not know you as well because for a lot of you, you've been presenting in performances that are not typical dance performance spaces, either again site-specific or in situ, or in your case, Bettina, you come mostly from visual arts previously. What made you decide to apply to a space that is very much fundamentally a dance space, even though they have a very open... they're very open when it comes to the kind of artists they present, but it is still like fundamentally a dance space. Why did you decide to bring your works to Tangente?
Well, I could, being invited, you don't say no. So, and I see also my piece is, there are dance elements. It's maybe more physical theater, actually. But I feel fine in that context, certainly with Tangente. It's totally appropriate. Because in where does it fit? It's in between many things, but so does a lot of art is like this, where dancers perform in museums and so on. But I actually like the challenge of changing the piece for a stage, and I also like the stage. I like this very conventional notion that people sit there, they wait, it starts, it's running, and then it's ending, and then they go outside, they sit all on one side, like really very simple, but I really enjoy that very much. I don't, for me it's a nice exploration to continue my work in general, and I will see where that leads to. Maybe I do more in that sense. But now it's the first time,
Also, Tangente's mandate is kind of like movement laboratory, so they are very interested and open to have performances that are out of the typical dance world norms, like dance, etc.
But this is a pretty, they invited us to come, so we, of course, were grateful for the offer, but also it is a very physical piece. Okay. Trust me, it's really it may not be dance in terms of modern forms or very formal, like it might not you may not see a particular movement or a typical kind of dance vocabulary, but it's it's movement and it's very physical, and there's no dialogue, so
actually my question was not so much more are you bringing movement to a space like Tangente, but more what interested you in bringing this to a more traditional setting for performance rather than the other way around. So not more like you as artists, what you feel from what you get out of presenting it in a space like that, which is which has more traditional codes of presentation.
Right. I'm hoping that it will open the audience to the work, or people who maybe go to see shows at Tangente will come and see it, because we've had a lot of support from the visual arts community. They tend to respond really well, and a lot of musicians have come to our shows and seen excerpts. We've done an excerpt at a poetry festival here in the city, so reaching maybe an audience that is more interested in seeing dance, perhaps, or even just in that. It's also that space. I'm really excited to do the piece in that space, even more so than the May space. I don't know quite why. Maybe because I'm really familiar with the space at the May. But this feels like something. It is monumental. Yeah. That just its very presence is quite. It is warm. There's a lot of stone. There's a lot of metal, but it's also quite mysterious and interesting.
Yeah, I don't feel it so warm. I find it's rather cold and not human. Like more industrial than anything else. And maybe there's something romantic about this, the presence of big steel, columns or something. But For me it was really. I remember an image from the film. Which one is it? The Citizen Kane, where someone goes in a room in an archive, and it's huge. There's only one table. It's empty. There's this really severe woman who lets this person in. He's someone who's researching on some documents, and then he sits there in this room with a very, very high ceiling and is alone. And for me, it's like that. I would like this to show like this. That's why I was thinking of using a smoke machine. I have to see if I don't do this. Might complicate things, but for me, it's really this high ceiling. I hope it's still there when there are lights installed and everything. That could also change a lot, but this is what I meant also with the black hole. But it's not. It's dark. Something very dark about that.
The access to the space also contributes to elements like that. I feel, Zohar, you mentioned a cave earlier, because you're going down into the space. You're like really climbing down into this very industrial factory, but just the physical relationship to your body going into that space, really like crawling down into it. I feel that there's something really powerful for an audience when you're actually not climbing up or not just going straight in, but actually going under the earth. I mean, not by much, but granted, just the fact that your spatial relationship to where you were changes. Is this something that you feel, because the May doesn't have that, the May, it's on the main floor in your case. Do you feel that the space itself, or even just the history of the space of being on Saint Laurent Street in a spot that was basically the red light district of Montreal, does the history of the space like that, or just its physical implications, change something for you when it comes to presenting the works at Monument National?
I think it plays it's strong. It is present, certainly, and it's also, that's why it was right away. I thought that's great, the perfect space, to do something. So I think it's all there. Also, when you go inside, when you're outside, you have the park in front, with a totally different people. They will never go into the monument. Exactly. And it's a strange area. Also, it's close to you have and it's close to downtown, but it's really
on the set.
Yeah.
So it is a very complex space and area and neighborhood. I think it also holds a lot of importance and value. And also when you mention it, people know the name, and people outside of performance or dance or whatever, they're conscious of it, or you explain where it is, and it has a sort of resonance. It has a kind of authority. There's something about it, I think, that makes it more official somehow. It's like, oh, you're presenting there. Like that's it has an actual presence on its own. And it's quite a beautiful facade as well. The external part of the building is quite beautiful and very powerful presence. Yeah. So what do you feel about that?
Well, it's a theater school, no? The building.
The upstairs.
It is the presentation space for the National Theatre School, but it's not where they hold most of their classes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a performance space upstairs, right? A theater I've been in that's quite different.
They've got quite a few different spaces in the Monument National, like different studios and theaters.
There's like a proscenium stage, I think, or like a thrust stage upstairs. So it's quite different than what we're in. But yeah, it has a background, has a history.
Another element which I find really interesting in the case of this show is that both for you, Bettina, and for Zohar, you come from visual arts first and foremost. Like Mary, you've been dancing basically your whole life, if I'm not mistaken, and you've dabbled and done a lot in visual arts too.
Well, I worked as a photographer for 6 years in Toronto, and the work that I showed there as an artist was installation mostly and photography. But and then I did a little bit of performance work there, so that was for about 6 years. Okay.
But for Zohar and Bettina, you come mainly from visual arts. This is one of the characteristics that really it's a different perspective, I guess is what I'm trying to say, from someone who's been in dance, who grew up dancing, choreographing. and you're bringing this different perspective into a choreographic work. How do you approach the art of creating choreographies and creating dance? Like, what brought you to dance as an art form, and how do you feel that your lens when you create will be applied to dance?
I mean, first of all, I don't know how a dancer would start choreographing work. I have no idea. I can say for myself, I'm not dancing myself, so I look at dancers and I propose movements, and then I look at them, and I want them quite strange, but also I want a certain intensity, so I decide everything visually. There's no concept. I don't know what a concept could be, but the dancers are improvising after I tell them what to do. There's always a constraint, so they should do a movement, and then something constrains the movement or is even contradictory. And that's already creating, there's a reaction, or there's a specific movement that comes out of that, which is awkward, which is unsettling, or sometimes it's also funny. So I think also compared to my video work, the performance is much more funny. I think you can laugh much more. My video work is rather serious, only serious, or yeah. But so it's difficult for me to compare myself with someone who's coming from dance but I'm not, I don't know, could I say and it's all about constellations of people together, how they touch, how they, whatever they pull each other, they're on the floor. It's also a lot like they're falling, they're in places where they shouldn't be, like crawling on the table. And this is my interest. So I could imagine a choreographer would explore more the physicality of the body, doing more things. But I keep it in a rather somewhat normal range of movements we do every day. But because they are they have the wrong speed, or they are applied in a wrong way, the action, so it looks, there's something wrong with that, or like off. And that's what I'm interested in. So sometimes you see this also in the street, someone is doing a movement and it looks really interesting or funny or something, but it's something like this I want to provoke, that normal movements or normal actions look really, really different.
I think directing and choreographing is very similar. So I do come from a background of directing for visuals, for cinema, for video, and the difference is directing yourself and choreographing yourself and being the performer as well as the choreographer. That's for me what was a challenge. And I think in terms of comparing myself to someone that does come from dance background more traditionally, I would say that maybe I have less boundaries about like the way the movement is, or about kind of the aesthetics of everything, the physicality of the show. And I'm not afraid of it being emotional or expressive emotionally, which is more considered theater, I would say. And I'm not afraid of making it look like sometimes it's not really dance, and I think a lot of dancers are there too, they have less and less boundaries. But I would think that because I don't come from that background, I have less fear coming into it, and just I'm more open.
Less of a need of proving some way, what I'm doing is really dance. Yeah, basically.
Definitely. But still, I want it to be professional looking. I want it to be aesthetically pleasing. I want it to, there's a lot of components to it. The movement needs to be diverse, because if it's not diverse, it's not interesting. If it always looks the same, and the physicality is the same, regardless if it looks like dance or looks like physical theater or whatever, it's still not very appealing. So So there's a lot to think about. There's a lot to think about that is beyond kind of more robotic sense of dancing. It's kind of a presentation of a space, a presentation of movers, and a presentation of a whole directed piece. It's pretty long, our show too, so there's a lot to think about.
Oh yeah, I was also thinking about another thing. My piece is also, I divided it into acts actually, which are like tableaus, so they're images in a way, which also, it's like a short video. And also I see my video work also pretty much as images, tableaus, so where something happens, but it's not narration, there's a situation, there's some action movements, and this is not so unlike the piece I'm showing. So there's also this sense of each tableau is pretty much 4 minutes long. So maybe that's also, I can't help, I have to divide it like this. For me, that feels very, it's a good rhythm to go from one piece to the other, to also go from no motion at all to rapid motion, and then in between also. So I could imagine a choreographer from dance would come up with totally different images, just because it's developed from the movements, from the capacity of the body, those things. And there was something interesting Zohar said about not having constraints. Like I heard so often in theater, they want to change the conventions, and I don't care. I can take conventions or not. I'm totally free. I don't have to do this post-modern thing of also showing that this is theater. I like it like this, and I think it's not so conservative what I'm doing. I also think there's something, I don't know, there was so much how's it called, theater in the 20s, also in Germany, Bauhaus, they did really strange theater pieces. I think there's maybe something related, or I don't know, I don't know, I have the feeling there's a certain aesthetic, like something very cold, geometric in my piece, which even relates to that. It's also not, there's no narration, even people talk and they use language, but it has nothing to do with dialogues. So everything is very, like I use those elements, the spoken word, French and English, and I don't know it's like an installation. You could have loudspeakers saying things, or you could read those things, but now it's all live and people speak it. So there's also the installation aspect, I think, is also quite extreme. The space is really like, we figure out the timing for going from one place to another. That has to be exactly this and so on. So, yeah.
Also, I wanted to add something that initially what interests me to get into the dance world or that performance world is our performers and choreographers and directors that are coming from a very rich background of visuals. So dance that is performance art par excellence, like the Sasha Waltz, which everything about the space and about the costumes and about the lighting and about the performance, it's so much about the visuals, and Romeo Castellucci and even Pina Bausch, things like that really interest me about the combination, and not just about dancing beautifully, because I am not coming from this background,
Bettina, you were mentioning to me before we started recording that for you this new type of presentation, which is with an audience sitting down while performers move in the space, you connected it to when you would do photography or video, basically of having bodies and just catching the images, but this time with a live performance, the audience becomes the camera. And in the past, you still got to control that camera a bit when it was moving from space to space. When it was at the Fonderie Darling, it was different tableaus strewn about in the space. But now your camera is a fixed point, and you don't have control over how you move it. How do you feel? Does it feel a bit unsettling for you, since you usually have the control over the lens of this time not having that control?
It's not only the lens. Yeah, okay. The lens is also usually I'm very close to dancers for my videos, so it's really close-ups. The camera is often motorized, so and that confines the space, which is visible. So I work a lot for my dancers to move in that space, so they can't do some movements they can't do because then they're not visible. So, and that defines this is the way I make the videos. But the camera is still it's even if it rotates, it's like this one view. It's like the audience sitting only on one side. So for me it's not so different. And yes, they are sitting more in the middle, more on the right, more on the left, but this I wouldn't be interested to videotape this piece like from far away. It would be something totally different to translate it back into video, but I don't find this unsettling. There's something else which is very different, because once I videotape, I redo it so many times until I have something which I find satisfying, and then I can even slow down the speed a little bit, pretty much invisible. I can add sounds and make it really, now it's fixed. So now you can see what you see, that's it. But with performance, I have to rely on my dancers, and they have quite some complex things to do. There's a lot of timing. It should work to be really great, but it's also not so bad if it's not really working. I think even when some things go really off, it's still great for the audience to see it, because I know exactly what I want. But there's still also improvisation in the piece, so there's always, it will vary. That will be clear, and I like that. But I know I will sit there totally tense and hope they do it right, But it will be good. And even we did it twice at the Darling Foundry, and it was 2 times different, and it was still good. It was, the essence was there. It was the same piece in a way, even so details were different. But and this I find on one hand quite nice, and I feel really light about this, but in the end, after the show, that's it. There's nothing left. And this is really strange. But I for the moment, I really I like that experience very much. Yeah.
Talking about this, the ephemeral quality of a live performance, for Mary and Zohar, in your case, you've decided to impose images, so set images onto the live performance. Can you tell us a bit about how you play with this juxtaposition of an image on top of another image that is created live in the space for the audience? Like, how do you approach this, like bringing a more organic image with a more, digital image together for the audience?
I think it's a really important question, not just that you're asking, but also that we ask ourselves as artists, especially working in dance or working in movement with video, because often the video is an accompaniment, but it's not part of the corps de ballet or whatever. Like, it's not part of, they're not a performer. In this particular video accompaniment, it's bodies moving in very specific ways. So I think it's actually quite compelling, the video, and I think at times our choreography will reference the video, not just while the video is playing, but echoes of it happen throughout the entire piece, so that it is integrated. I think for me that's been the most important thing, to make sure that it's integrated. Again, we haven't really had a lot of opportunity to rehearse this time with it. It happens somewhat in the periphery of my mind, I guess. But certainly with this particular presentation, we will be more integrated in it, our actual bodies. My concern generally with any video in any performance piece, whether I'm the viewer or the performer, is that the video itself is more interesting than what's happening live. And I see this in
Does it detract from the live performance?
Yeah.
It's quite often a problem when video is being used with live bodies.
I think in this case it's okay because it goes back and forth, and also the video's quite stunning. It's quite beautiful. It's a video montage that Zohar's created specifically for this piece, and it's quite, everything that we include in the work we agree upon on most levels. So I think at times perhaps it is more interesting than what we're doing, but we've chosen to make that part of the piece, right? So that you can actually look at it because our body is still while you're seeing a certain image. But you may want to speak to that, Zohar.
I wanted to add on the movement, the bodies moving in the video that is integrated in with our performance. The bodies that are moving for a certain agenda or for a certain goal, and there's that movement that we're seeing in the video is kind of a choreographed mass of bodies that are gathered for something, to reach certain goal or agenda, as I said. And that's something we wanted to address in our performance as well. Dance is something that is similar, and I think that it's a big... a lot of times when I see dance and a video combined together, it doesn't work, because I think if there's a video, the video should have space, it should have focus, it should have presence, and the play between performance and video needs to be very gentle, very, very clear to the audience. Why did we choose those images at that specific point? And as Mary said, when there's not a lot of parts of video, there's one in the beginning, which is kind of like the opening of the show, and one in the middle of the show. And during those during the videos, we're doing very minimal movement, so the actual video has focus and has presence that takes over the space.
Yeah, it's like they're collaborators.
So it's basically a choice. Like the use of the video is not just we're gonna tag this on, we're gonna put it there. It's really we're integrating it, and it becomes it's not an afterthought or anything like that.
That more and more, I would like anything that I do to be very specific, very important choices to the work, so that the language of the piece is there's no other narrative coming in unless that's a choice. But I think when you start out presenting work, you often have pressure from different technical advisors or crews that, well, why do you want this, or we can't do this, or we have to do this. And more I see myself becoming that stereotypical kind of diva artist, because it's so important. The lighting, the sound, the video, the costumes. I mean, Bettina's doing her own lighting, and eventually I would like to have more say in the lighting. I don't know how lighting designers are going to feel about that, but absolutely it's a very specific, conscious choice, and it has to be, because it becomes obvious. The last piece that I saw, the Charles Cornejo piece, Pure, at the May, every single detail was painstakingly chosen by him, and he's a visual artist and he's a dance artist, and you can tell. There's a different feeling when the artist leaves the space and when the show is over, when all of those elements have been deeply considered and chosen and taken seriously. So that's, I think, eventually that's where I would like to go even further, even deeper. But certainly in this piece, and I know in Bettina's piece that's the case. It's very, and I don't know if that has something to do with coming from a visual arts background. I know when we look at images or video documentation, Zohar and I both, we see images, we see sculpture, snapshots. It's like, hold this. So there's also an element of live sculpture. But just to answer your question more specifically, yes, everything is really a specific choice. In this case, I would like personally to have had more time to look at those elements, but I also trust in the choices that my collaborator has made in relation to the visual elements. So, and we also have been, we're still fine-tuning the soundtrack.
Okay.
So it's I also see the process, it's never ending. Sometimes when I was working in theater years ago, there are certain directors who wouldn't give you notes during the show. It was a big taboo. But I also preferred to work with writers and directors who continued to give notes throughout the process.
It's never evolving.
Yeah,
thing.
The performance is not some kind of magical moment. It's process, it's work, it's a job site, and you continue to work and you continue to receive feedback on that work, both positive and negative. And I think that's really important to the process.
Well, it's all the time we have for this week. So just to remind everyone, this is a show that's being presented this week at Tangente, at the Studio Hydro-Québec at the Monument National. It will be at 7:30 p.m. on October 30th, 31st, and November 1st, and at 4 p.m. on Sunday, November 2nd. So just remind also, it was Bettina Hoffmann talking to us about her piece Isolation, and Mary Williamson, St-Amand, and Zohar Melinek talking to us about Nation Individual. So thank you everyone so much for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Great.
So right before we go, we'll leave you off with an excerpt from the score that was created by Zohar Melinek from his piece Nation Individual with Mary St-Amand Williamson. Dirty Feet was previously recorded at the Montreal Improv Theatre and is currently recorded out of Mainline Theatre. Thanks, dudes.
Dirty Feet est produit et animé par
Produced and hosted by Allison Burns,
JD Papillon,
et Stéphanie Moret-Robert.
You can find out more about our show at nomoreradio.com, follow us on Twitter at Dirty Feet, and find us on Facebook at Dirty Feet Podcast.
Vous pouvez écouter tous nos épisodes sur notre site web ou vous pouvez vous abonner également sur iTunes à notre podcast.
listen to past episodes on website or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes.
While you're there, be sure to give us a rating and or leave a comment to help us spread the word.
Tune in next week for a whole new show.